Aidan Mercer, the youngest partner in Mercer Halverson's 70-year history, found his missing wife folding laundry in the back room of a coin laundromat in a town called Belford, 4 hours north of Toronto, on a Tuesday morning in February when the temperature outside had not climbed above -18. She had cut her hair to her jaw and dyed it darker, and she was wearing a faded green work vest with the laundromat's name stitched in yellow thread above the left breast pocket. And when she looked up from the basket and saw him standing in the doorway with snow still on his shoulders, she said the only thing in the world that could have undone him. She said, "I knew you'd find me eventually. I just needed a little more time." He had been driving since 4 in the morning. The client meeting in Sudbury had been pushed to the following week, and his assistant had rebooked his train, and Aidan, who had not slept properly in 19 months, had gotten into his car instead of calling a car service, because driving in the dark was the only way he knew how to think without the thinking becoming unbearable. He had taken the highway north. He had driven past the city limits and into the long, flat dark of the 400 corridor, and had thought about nothing for 2 hours. And then, somewhere past Barrie, he had stopped for gas and coffee at a station with a hand-lettered sign in the window offering homemade butter tarts, and he had bought 3 of them and eaten them standing at his car in the cold, and he had looked at the map on his phone for no reason he could name. And he had seen the name Belford, and something in him had pulled. He had been here once. 19 months ago, before she left, she had mentioned Belford. She had said it the way people mention places they have loved when they are not expecting to be asked about them. They had been lying in bed on a Sunday morning with the Toronto skyline flat and grey through the bedroom window, and she had said that her grandmother had taken her to Belford once when she was 7, and that she had wanted, her whole life, to go back in summer when the lake was warm enough to swim in. He had driven to Belford on a feeling he would not have been able to defend to anyone. He had been a husband for 8 months. He had been a husband without a wife for 19 months. The coin laundromat was called Lakeside Wash, which Aidan supposed was aspirational, because there was no lake visible from the main street of Belford in February. The sign in the window was hand-painted. The door stuck when he pushed it. Inside, the machines ran in a long row, and the air was warm and damp and smelled of detergent, and the particular exhausted warmth of a room that has been heated all winter by the residual heat of appliances. A woman in her 60s sat at the front counter, reading a paperback with a polar bear on the cover. She looked up when he came in. She did not smile. She assessed him in the way of a woman who has run a business alone for a long time and knows what a person who does not belong in a room looks like. He said he was looking for the manager. She said she was the owner. He said he was looking for someone who worked there. She looked at him for a long moment without blinking, and then she looked past him at the back hallway, and she said quietly, "I think you'd better go on through." He had pushed through the door marked staff. The back room was narrow and white-walled and lit by 2 bare bulbs. There were 3 folding tables set up in a row. There were wire shelving units stacked with clean linen in clear plastic bags. And at the far end, beside a utility sink, standing with her back to him sorting a basket of dark clothing by fabric weight, was his wife, Renata Mercer, née Sobieralski, 34 years old, 5 feet 4 inches, the woman who had left him a note on the kitchen island of their Rosedale home on a Wednesday morning 19 months ago, written on the back of a grocery receipt in her handwriting that he had memorized in 8 months of marriage and not forgotten in 19 months of her absence. "Don't call the police. I am not in danger. I am sorry. I will explain everything. Please trust me." He had stood in the kitchen in his suit, with his briefcase still in his hand, and read it 4 times. He had called the police. He had called her sister. He had called her mother. He had hired a firm out of Mississauga that specialized in finding people who did not want to be found. They had checked the addresses she had listed on various forms over the years. They had checked the island in Georgian Bay, where her parents owned a cottage. They had checked the apartment of a university friend in Vancouver. They had found nothing. He had told the press she was on medical leave. No one had pressed him on it. Aidan Mercer was the sort of man about whom journalists printed what he gave them, because he gave them enough and never more. He had spent the first 6 months of his marriage in a state of private, controlled devastation. He had attended every client dinner. He had closed a commercial real estate deal that the firm had been negotiating for 3 years. He had taken his father to his cardiac follow-up appointments every second Thursday and had stayed for lunch and talked about hockey, with a patience he had to manufacture from somewhere. He had smiled in the photographs at the firm's anniversary gala in November. and he had gone home every night to a house that still had her reading glasses on the nightstand because he had asked the cleaning service not to move anything that was hers. After a year, the firm in Mississauga had sent a final report and a final invoice, and a letter from the director saying that Renata Mercer did not want to be located, and that they had exhausted their reasonable avenues. He had paid the invoice. He had filed the report in a locked drawer in his study. He had sat at his desk for a while, looking at the city lights below, and then he had gone back to work. And now she was in front of him, sorting laundry by hand, and she had known he would find her, and she had needed more time, and his knees were not doing what knees were supposed to do. "Renata," he said. She turned around. She had lost weight. The line of her collarbone above the green vest was sharper than he remembered. Her hands, when she set the shirt she had been holding back into the basket, were rough and reddened in a way they had never been when she had been a junior archivist at the university library in the city. She had a small cut, healed to a thin line along the knuckle of her left index finger. She had not been wearing gloves. "I'm not done," she said. "I need 8 more weeks, and then I'll come home and tell you everything." He stepped into the room. He did not know what he intended to do with the step. He needed to be in the room with her. That was all he knew. "I was driving north," he said. "I stopped for gas." "Butter tarts," she said. He stared at her. "The station south of town," she said. "They sell them. You always stopped there on the drive up to the cottage when we were dating." I remembered that. He had dated her for 14 months before they married. He had driven her to her parents' cottage on Georgian Bay 4 times. He had always stopped at that station for butter tarts. "Renata." "I know." She turned back to the basket. She did not pick anything up. She kept her hands resting on the rim of the basket, looking down at the dark clothes. "I know what I owe you. I know what this has cost you. I need you to know that I have thought about that every single day and that it has not been something I could fix any faster than I have been fixing it." "What are you fixing?" She was quiet for a moment. 8 weeks, she said. "I need 8 weeks. And then I will tell you everything, all of it. I promise you. Renata, I know you were going to come home in 8 weeks without telling me where you'd been." She didn't answer. "Were you? I hadn't decided yet," she said. "I was going to be far enough along that I could decide. I was going to be in a position to actually decide. That's all I knew how to do." He pressed both hands against the top of the utility shelf beside him. He looked at the ceiling, he looked back at her. "I'm not going to take you anywhere," he said. "I'm not going to call anyone. I'm going to walk back out to the front of this building, and I'm going to tell that woman at the counter that I'm passing through Belford, and I'd like to know if there's an inn or a bed and breakfast in town." "The Fenmore House," Renata said quietly. "On Lakeshore Road. Mrs. Yeo rents by the week. She has a room with a window facing the water. Tell her you're a writer on a deadline." He looked at her for a long moment. She had still not turned around. "I'm going to be in this town," he said, "and you're going to be in this town, and I'm not going to make a single demand. And in 8 weeks, whatever you need to tell me, you're going to tell me." She pressed her hands flat on the rim of the basket. "All right," she said. "All right," he said. He walked back out through the door. He stood in the front room for a moment. The woman at the counter looked up from her book. She had a face that had made many decisions about people over many years, and her face made no decision about him that he could read. "The Fenmore House," he said. "On Lakeshore Road. Tell Connie Yeo that Betta sent you," the woman said. "She'll give you the good room." He nodded. He went back out into the cold. Her name, it turned out, was Bet Laramie. She had owned Lakeside Wash for 22 years, since her divorce, when she had taken her settlement and the only skill her mother had ever told her mattered, which was knowing how to keep things clean. She had hired Renata, or rather, she had hired the woman who had walked into the laundromat 16 months ago in the middle of a February afternoon carrying a canvas bag and asking whether there was any work. And she had known within 2 weeks who Renata was, or rather who Renata was not, because the woman she had hired was too careful about everything for her name to be her real name. And Bet had run a business alone for 22 years and knew the shape of a woman who was protecting herself. Aidan learned this over the course of the first 4 days. He ate his meals at the only diner in Belford, a place called the Cardinal, which sat on the corner of Main Street and the road that ran down to the lake, and which was run by a man named Mr. Tran who made congee every morning and beef stew every Wednesday and did not ask questions. Aidan sat at a table near the window and read and watched the street. On the 3rd morning, Renata came in for coffee before her shift. She sat at a table across the room. She did not look at him, but when she stood to leave, she passed close enough to his table that she set a library book on the edge of it without slowing down. It was a book about bird migration. On the inside cover, she had written in pencil, very small, "Don't come to the laundromat. I'll find you." On the 5th evening, she came to the Fenmore house. She knocked twice. Quickly, he opened the door. She was wearing her work vest over a grey wool sweater, and her breath was visible in the cold of the hallway, because the heating on that floor was temperamental, and Mrs. Yeo had apologized twice about it and left extra blankets. "Can we walk?" Renata said. They walked the length of Lakeshore Road and back. The lake was frozen over except for a seam of dark water near the far shore that Aidan was told by Mr. Tran the next morning was where a spring fed in from the bedrock. The ice was flat and grey in the dark, and the cold was the particular clean cold of the Canadian Shield in winter, the kind that fills the lungs like water. They did not speak for the first 10 minutes. Then she said, "I want you to know 2 things tonight. Just 2. The rest has to wait." "All right. The first thing is that I am not with anyone. There has been no one. I want you to know that. Because I know it is the thing you haven't let yourself wonder about. Because if you let yourself wonder about it, you would not have been able to keep going. And I know the way you keep going, Aidan. I've watched you keep going since your father's bypass, and I don't want you to have to keep going through this one any longer than necessary." He said nothing. He walked. He kept his eyes on the line where the ice met the shore. "The second thing is that I have not touched a single dollar of our money, not the joint accounts, not the savings. I have a checking account at the credit union here under my mother's maiden name. There is $412 in it. That is everything I have." He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. "Renata, I know. You've been here for 16 months. 17 now. You've been folding other people's laundry for 17 months. I've also been doing the bookkeeping for Lakeside Wash," she said. "And for the Cardinal on Thursday evenings. Bet pays me in cash. Mr. Tran gives me dinner instead of a paycheck, which is frankly a better arrangement." He turned to look at her. In the dark and the cold, with the light from the nearest street lamp cutting across the ice, she looked more like herself than she had in the laundromat. The haircut, which had startled him, he was beginning to understand. It was a practical cut. Everything about her was practical now in a way that had not been true before. 8 weeks, he said. 8 weeks, and then I'll tell you everything. And then you can do whatever you need to do, and I will understand whatever that is." He looked back at the lake. "I'm not going to do anything except wait," he said. "You don't know what I have to tell you yet." "No. It might change things. I don't think it will, Aidan. I don't think it will change anything," he said. "But tell me in 8 weeks and I will listen to whatever you need to say." She was quiet for a moment. "Don't tip more than 10% at the Cardinal," she said finally. "Mr. Tran notices. He doesn't say anything, but he notices and then he feels he owes you something, and that makes him unhappy." "All right," he said. "And don't sit at the counter unless Bet invites you. The counter is for regular." "All right. And Mrs. Yeo has a son who checks in every Sunday. He knows who I am. He won't say anything to you, but he'll know who you are by the end of the first week. And if you want him to be useful rather than cautious, bring him a bag of those butter tarts from the south of town station." "I'll do that. Good night, Aidan." "Good night." He walked her back to her car. She drove a rusted 2009 Civic that he did not recognize. She did not look at him when she got in, but as she pulled out, she turned the headlights on before she had cleared the parking space, and the light swept briefly across his face, and she left it there for 1 full second before she drove. He went back inside. He sat on the edge of the bed. He looked at his hands for a long while. The thing about waiting, he discovered over the weeks that followed, was that it had a texture he had not expected. It was not passive. Waiting in Belford turned out to be a practice that required something from him he had not known he possessed, which was the ability to be present in a place without trying to manage it. He learned the rhythm of the town. He learned that the mail came at 11, and that Mrs. Yeo sorted it at the front table, with her reading glasses on the end of her nose, and that she read the community notices the way most people read the news. He learned that Mr. Tran made the congee better on Thursdays because the cream delivery came on Wednesday, and he used the excess in the broth. He learned that the woman who ran the post office was named Ms. Abara, and that she had a habit of leaving early on Fridays to take her mother to a ceramics class 3 towns over, and that the Saturday post was therefore always sorted by her teenager son, who did it in alphabetical order by first name rather than last, which caused considerable confusion for a man named Mr. Zellers who lived at the end of Brock Street. He learned that Renata was quietly essential to Belford in a way that was difficult to see if you were looking for it loudly. She helped Bet Laramie file the quarterly HST returns that Bet had been calculating wrong for 6 years. She walked the Desjardins family's dog on the mornings when Mr. Desjardins' arthritis was bad, which in February was every morning. She had spent 2 months helping a teenager named Kwame Adjei write the applications for a provincial arts grant, and Kwame had gotten the grant, and now Kwame was spending his Sunday afternoons turning the back room of his parents' hardware store into a printmaking studio, and he left 1 print each week on the counter at Lakeside Wash as a kind of tithe. On the evening of the 3rd week, the journalist arrived. Her name was Paige Sutter. She was from a Toronto lifestyle magazine that had published 4 long features about Aidan in the past 8 years. All of them admiring, none of them accurate about anything that actually mattered. She had brown hair and a recorder she kept clipped to her lapel, and she had been in the cafe on Main Street for 2 days before she came into the Cardinal. Aidan saw her come in. He recognized her in the way you recognize someone you have only ever met in professional circumstances and then see in the wrong context. She ordered tea. She opened her laptop. She did not look at him immediately. He ate his stew. He paid. He went to find Bet. Betta was at the laundromat changing a dryer filter when he came in. She listened to him describe Paige Sutter without looking up from the filter. When he was done, she said, "How long has she been in town?" 2 days, I think. She hasn't been in here. Bet set the filter in the waste bin. She dusted her hands on her work pants. "Renata's off today. She won't be in until tomorrow morning." "I know, so Renata hasn't seen her, not yet." Bet looked at him for the first time. "What are you thinking of doing?" "I don't know yet," he said. "I don't want to do anything without talking to Renata first." Bet nodded once slowly. "I'll get her," she said. She came back 40 minutes later with Renata. Renata was in a wool hat and her coat, and she had clearly been pulled away from something because she had a streak of paint on her left wrist that she did not appear to have noticed. She listened to what Aidan described. She asked 2 questions. Then she was quiet for a long moment, standing in the middle of the back room between the folding tables. "She doesn't have anything yet," Renata said. "Not that I can tell. If she did, she would have come to you directly. She would have put the recorder on the table. That's how she works." He looked at her. "You've read her work." "I've had a lot of time to read," Renata said. "She's good. She's also fair. She's been following your public schedule for months. She noticed you were gone and she tracked you here. That's competent, not malicious." She paused. "I think you should go back to Toronto." "What?" "Go back to the city, go to the office, be visible, be boring, do a board meeting and a charity lunch, and go to your father's Thursday appointment and let her photograph you being ordinary and accounted for in Toronto. If you disappear from the city for 7 more weeks, she'll have a story whether or not she finds me. If you're back in the city for the next 7 weeks, she has nothing, and you'll be here alone. I'm used to being here." "That isn't what I said." She met his eyes. "I know what you said." He looked at the floor. He looked back up. 7 weeks is a long time. 6 weeks and 5 days, she said. "The appointment is on a Thursday. By Thursday, it will be 6 weeks and 5 days. What appointment?" She looked at him. Something shifted in her face, something that was not quite readiness and not quite fear, but lived close to both. "The thing I have to tell you in 8 weeks, she said. "There is an appointment, a legal appointment, in 6 weeks and 5 days. When it is done, I will call you from Betty's phone, because I do not have a phone, and you will drive back up here, and I will tell you everything. And then we'll decide what we're going to do. I'm coming back the same day." "I know you are. Renata, I know, Aidan. I know." He left the next morning before 7. He drove south in the dark. He went to the office. He called his assistant and had 4 meetings rescheduled to the following week. He called a journalist he trusted at a national paper and gave her a brief and careful quote about taking time to reflect and being glad to be back. He went to his father's Thursday appointment. He was photographed at the firm's winter client event. He was photographed at the conservation gala he and Renata had attended every year since they married. This year alone, with a public smile he had been manufacturing since she left, he was the most boringly visible partner in Bay Street for 6 weeks. Paige Sutter published a small item noting that Aidan Mercer had been seen returning to his regular schedule after a period of quiet absence, possibly related to ongoing private circumstances. The item was 6 sentences long. It did not mention Belford. It did not mention Renata. It was picked up by 2 other outlets and forgotten by the following Tuesday. The appointment, he learned later, was in a county courthouse in a town 60 kilometers west of Belford. What she had been doing in Belford for 17 months was this. Her father's business partner, a man named Douglas Stroud, had been her father's closest friend since university. He had been the man who had walked Renata down the aisle at their wedding, because her own father had died of a stroke when she was 22. He had given a toast at the reception that had made her cry and made Aidan's mother cry, and had seemed to everyone present to be the most genuine expression of love for a young woman that a man could offer. Douglas Stroud had also, for the better part of a decade, been moving money through a series of numbered companies registered in the province. He had registered those companies using, among other things, signatures he had collected over years from Renata's father during the partnership, and, once Renata's father was gone, a power of attorney document that her father had signed late in his illness, and that Stroud had used very carefully and very sparingly to extend the registry of those companies into the following decade. One of those companies had, at the time of Renata and Aidan's wedding, been brought current by the addition of one new signatory. A signature that appeared on the registry documents to belong to Aidan Mercer, solicitor and partner, whose name on a corporate document carried the weight of professional certification. The signature was not Aidan's. Stroud had obtained it from a document Aidan had signed at the wedding reception. A card, a gift register, an innocuous sheet of paper that Stroud had put in front of him with a story about a charitable donation in the couple's name. Aidan had signed without reading closely because it was his wedding day, and Douglas Stroud had walked his wife down the aisle and he had had no reason to read closely. Renata had not known about this when she married him. She had learned about it the morning after their wedding, when Stroud had come to the hotel. He had knocked at 7 in the morning. Aidan had already gone down to meet the family at breakfast. Renata had been in the room alone, sitting in the armchair by the window, reading the paper, still in her dressing gown. Happy in a way she had not been expecting to be as happy as she was. And the knock had been Stroud. He had sat down across from her. He had told her what the companies were. He had told her what he had done. He had told her, very calmly, that the signature was on the documents, and that it looked legitimate because it was adjacent to a legitimate document, and that if Renata said anything to Aidan or to anyone, Stroud would ensure that the registry was noticed by the kind of regulatory body that noticed these things, and that by the time the investigation resolved, if it ever did, Aidan's professional certification would be suspended, his partnership would be in question, and the years it would take to clear his name would be enough to undo everything they had built. She had listened. She had not moved from the armchair. He had told her that all he needed was her silence, that the companies were close to the end of their useful life anyway, that in 2 years, perhaps 3, he would wind them down and the money would be accounted for, and the documents would be buried in a bankruptcy filing in a jurisdiction that asked no questions. He had told her he had loved her father like a brother and that this was not personal. She had sat in the armchair until he left, and then she had sat for another 2 hours thinking. She had thought about waking Aidan. She had thought about calling the Law Society. She had thought about calling the police. Every version of those thoughts ended in the same place. The signature on the documents looked like Aidan's because it was adjacent to Aidan's, and in the time it would take to prove otherwise, the damage would be real and permanent. There was one way to undo it that did not require Aidan's name to enter any record. The companies were registered under her father's power of attorney. The power of attorney had expired at her father's death. The expiry had been incorrectly processed, or rather, Stroud had arranged for it not to be processed, but the expiry was real, and it was in the original document, and if she could demonstrate the expiry in a court proceeding that challenged the validity of the registry filings on procedural grounds, the filings would be invalidated. The companies would be struck. The struck companies would have no valid signatories. Aidan's name would never have to appear in any proceedings at all. She had to do it under her mother's maiden name. She had to do it in a jurisdiction where no one would connect her to Aidan Mercer. She had to do it without a lawyer because a lawyer would ask questions she could not answer without creating the paper trail Stroud could use. She had to do it from outside the life she had been living, from a name that had no address and no credit history and no Google footprint. She had packed a bag. She had written the note on the back of a grocery receipt because it was the only paper in the nightstand drawer. She had taken the cash from the envelope in her coat pocket that had been there since a cash withdrawal she had made the week before to pay the piano tuner. She had gone out the service entrance of the hotel. She had taken a bus to the train station. She had taken the train north. She had arrived in Belford because of her grandmother, because the town was real to her, and she needed somewhere real. She had walked into Lakeside Wash because it was warm. Bette had given her a job without asking her name twice. She had spent the first 4 months reading everything she could find at the Belford Public Library about corporate law and power of attorney statutes and provincial registry procedures. The library was small, and the collection was not specialized. But the librarian, a man named Mr. Osei, who had worked there for 31 years and had a deep suspicion of incomplete research, had arranged interlibrary loans from 3 university collections and had never asked what she was writing. She had taken notes in a spiral notebook with a blue cover and had kept the notebook in a locked box under her bed at the rooming house on Brock Street, where she had rented a room from an older woman who watched her evening news at considerable volume and left casseroles outside Renata's door twice a week without explanation. She had filed the first challenge in month 7. It had been accepted. The company had been flagged for review. She had filed the second in month 12. It had gone to hearing. She had attended the hearing as Katarzyna Sobieralska, which was her mother's full legal name, and which appeared on no document of her own. The judge had granted the application. The second company had been struck. The third was the hardest. The third company was in a jurisdiction that required a personal appearance before a registrar and a sworn statement from the challenging party attesting to the circumstances of the original filing. She had written the statement herself on the typewriter in the back office of Lakeside Wash, where Bet had kept a machine she used for invoices. She had typed the statement 5 times until it was exactly right. She had filed it. The appointment had been set for a Thursday in March, which was the Thursday that was 6 weeks and 5 days from the morning Aidan had driven back to Toronto. The appointment lasted 23 minutes. The registrar read the statement. The registrar asked her 3 questions. She answered. The registrar granted the application. The third company was struck. The proceedings were closed. She drove back to Belford. She sat in her car outside Lakeside Wash for a while. She went inside. She went to the back room. She stood at the utility sink and washed her hands, which did not need washing, and looked at her hands in the water for a long time. Then she went to Betty's office and asked to use the phone. Aidan answered on the second ring. She said, "The appointment is done." "Are you already driving?" he said. "I've been in the car for an hour," she said. "Of course you have." He arrived at 4 in the afternoon. He parked in front of the Cardinal and he came in and sat at his regular table and he ordered the Thursday stew, and Mr. Tran brought it without being asked and poured him a cup of tea and did not say anything. Renata came in at 4:30, still in her work vest. She sat down across from him. She set both hands on the table. "Tell me," he said. She told him. She told him about the morning after the wedding. She told him about Douglas Stroud. She told him about the power of attorney and the 3 companies and the signature that looked like his. She told him about the note on the grocery receipt, and the bus to the train station and the train north. She told him about the library and Mr. Osei and the interlibrary loans. She told him about the spiral notebook with the blue cover. She told him about the typewriter and the 5 drafts of the sworn statement. She told him about the 3 hearings and the 3 applications and the Thursday in March. She told him all of it. She did not rush. She told it the way a person tells something they have held alone for a long time and have thought about telling for every day of that time. When she was finished, Aidan set his spoon down beside his bowl. He pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. He breathed. Then he said, "Douglas Stroud walked you down the aisle. Yes. He made a speech. Yes. He made your mother cry. Yes." He took his hands away from his eyes. He looked at her. "You were in the armchair in the hotel room, and he came and sat across from you and told you all of this, and you were alone." "Yes, and you didn't wake me." She looked at him steadily. "If I had woken you," she said, "you would have called your senior partner, and your senior partner would have called the Law Society, and the Law Society would have opened an inquiry. And by the time the inquiry resolved, Stroud would have made sure the documents were found first, and the finding would have come before the resolution, and you would have spent 3 years trying to prove a signature wasn't yours while your career was on hold, and your name was in the business section of every paper in the country. Renata, you would have hired the best people you knew," she said, "and they would have done their best work, and it still would have taken longer than this, and it still would have left a record, and I could not let that happen to you." He looked at the table, he looked at his hands, he looked at her. "The third company," he said, "you appeared in person." "Yes, under your mother's full name, yes. In front of a registrar, yes, alone, yes." He was quiet for a long time. "I would like to tell you," he said finally, "that I would have handled it differently, that there was a better way, that you should have trusted me." She waited. "But you're right," he said. "I would have hired people. I would have made it about the firm. I would have done exactly what you said I would do. And the record would exist. And your name would be in it, and mine would be in it, and Stroud's lawyers would have had something to work with for years." "You did the only thing that worked," he said. "Yes, she said. You did it alone, for 19 months. 17 in Belford, she said. 2 months before that getting here. He picked up his tea, he set it back down. Renata, he said. Yes. I have not moved your reading glasses, he said. They are still on the nightstand. I asked the cleaning service not to touch them. They think I've lost my mind, I don't care. She looked at him. Her eyes filled. She did not let it become more than that. Don't tell me things like that yet, she said. I still have to call my mother. I still have to call my sister. I still have to tell Bet I'm leaving and find out if Kwame Adjei is going to be all right with the grant paperwork by himself. I have to write a letter to Mr. Osi at the library and to Mrs. Yeo and to the woman at the rooming house on Brock Street, who left casseroles outside my door for 17 months without once asking me why I needed them. Mrs. Haverstock, Renata said. You'll meet her. She is 79, and she watches the news at an incredible volume, and she will ask you 3 personal questions within 5 minutes of meeting you, and all 3 of them will be correct. He almost smiled. When? A week, she said. Give me a week. I need to give Bet proper notice. I can't walk out on a Friday. I need to help her find someone. Mr. Tran needs someone to do the Thursday bookkeeping. Kwame needs to know about the next reporting period on the grant. Mrs. Yeo's son. I've been helping him with a boundary dispute on the family property, and I need to make sure his file is in order before I go. None of this is as important as coming home with you, but all of it is important, and I am not leaving Belford as someone who ran when she didn't need to anymore. He looked at her. A week, he said. A week, she said. And then you come home. And then I come home. And you tell me everything about Douglas Stroud. Everything I know. My firm's general counsel is going to want to look at this. I know. And the Law Society may still open an inquiry, even without the documents on the registry. I know that too, but it will be different. You'll have all 3 applications and all 3 grants and the registrar's record from Thursday. It will be a very different kind of inquiry. He nodded. Renata, yes, is there anything? Any document, any record, any filing? That still has your name on it. Your real name, she thought. No, she said. Everything is under Katarzyna Sobierolska. Or handwritten on paper in Bet's files, which she will keep. There is nothing electronic. I have not been on the internet in 14 months. I have not had a phone. I have not used a credit card. He absorbed this. The typewriter, he said. Bet's keeping it. All right. She reached across the table. She put her hand over his. Mr. Tran came out of the kitchen with 2 pieces of butter tart square on a small plate. He set them down between Renata and Aidan without speaking. He went back to the kitchen. The kitchen door swung once and was still. Outside, on the main street of Belford, the afternoon light was doing what February light in northern Ontario does, which is to flatten and go blue very early, so that by 4:30 the street looks less like a street than a photograph of one. The ice on the lake, visible over the Cardinal, was beginning to go grey at the edges, not melting, not yet. Just thinking about it. She did not go home in a week. She went home in 10 days. Because Kwame's printmaking studio needed a final inspection for the grant reporting period, and she had promised to be there, and because Mrs. Haverstock's daughter came up from Barry for the weekend, and Renata stayed for the dinner, which ran long in the way of dinners where people know each other very well and have not been together in some time. Aidan stayed in Belford for those 10 days. He helped Mr. Tran move a chest freezer that had been sitting in the wrong position for 3 years. He walked the Desjardins dog on the one morning that Mr. Desjardins' arthritis made the front steps impossible. He sat in the Cardinal every Thursday morning and did not tip more than 10%, and did not sit at the counter until the Thursday, when Bet Laramie came in and sat down at the counter and looked at the stool beside her and said, without looking at him, "Well, are you going to sit here or aren't you?" He sat there. She poured him coffee. She did not say anything about Renata. She talked about the weather coming in from the north, and about whether Mr. Tran was going to repaint the Cardinal this spring, or leave it another year, and about the proper way to anchor a shelf bracket so it didn't come off the wall in 15 years. He listened, he answered when there was something to answer. He did not try to fill the quiet. When she poured his second cup, she said, "She's been good here. I want you to know that. She has been very good here." "I know," he said. "She wasn't good in the way of being easy," Bet said. "She was good in the way of being thorough. There's a difference. She learned everything she did here the hard way, and she did not complain about it, and she never once asked me to make an exception for her." "That sounds like her," he said. Bet nodded. "You're taking her back to the city," she said. "I'm driving her back. You'll come back up." It was not a question. "Yes," he said. Bet set the coffee pot down. She folded her hands on the counter. "There's a property on the Lake Road," she said. 3 blocks east, small house, needs work. The family's been trying to move it for 2 years. It has a porch. He looked at her. Renata liked the lake, Betty said. She's not said it to me directly, but I know she liked the lake. In summer, she used to go down there before her shift and sit on the rocks for half an hour. Just sit. She'd come back in looking like a different person. He thought about this. Tell me who owns it, he said. She told him. On the last morning, Renata packed the apartment at the rooming house. There was not much: the blue spiral notebook, the grandmother's cookbook, a small collection of library books she needed to return, a wool blanket Mrs. Haverstock had given her in November, 3 changes of clothes, and the letter she had written to Mr. O'C at the library, which she slid under the library door on her way to the car, because she could not trust herself to hand it to him without making it a longer goodbye than she had the composure for. Aidan loaded the car. He drove. She sat in the passenger seat with the blue notebook in her lap. The town receded in the mirrors. The lake, for a moment, was visible through the trees, flat and grey and beginning, at the southern edge, to show the faintest line of dark water where the ice was softening. In summer, she said, the lake is warm enough to swim in. I know, he said. She looked at him. You told me, he said, years ago, before we were married. You told me your grandmother brought you up here and the lake was warm and you've wanted to come back in summer. Your whole life. She was quiet. We're coming back, he said, in summer. We've got a reason to come back now. She looked out the window for a long time. Then she said, the house on the lake road. Bet told you, he said. Bet tells me everything eventually, she said. She is constitutionally incapable of keeping a secret she thinks I'd want to know. He drove. The highway opened up below Barry. The long familiar southward pulled toward the city. The light went from the flat blue of the shield to the pale grey of a March sky approaching the 400. The radio was off. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Then she said, I have to tell you something. He kept his eyes on the road. When I was sitting in the armchair in the hotel room, she said, and he finished telling me. After he left, I sat there for a while, and I thought about waking you up. I thought about it very seriously. I got up. I walked to the door between our rooms. I put my hand on the handle. He waited. And then I didn't, she said, because I knew what would happen. I knew you. I knew how you would handle it, and I knew what it would cost you, and I knew it was not your fight to have. But I also... She stopped. She looked out the window. I also didn't wake you, because I didn't know if I was brave enough to watch your face when I told you. I didn't know if I could bear to be there for the moment when you understood what he had done and how long he had been doing it. I told myself it was strategy, but some of it was that I was not brave enough, and I want you to know that. The highway was empty. The kilometer signs came and went. You built 3 legal cases by yourself, he said, from scratch with no legal training, in a public library in a town 4 hours from home, under a name that isn't yours, and then you appeared at 3 separate hearings alone and won all 3 of them. Yes, she said, and you're telling me you weren't brave enough. I'm telling you the truth, she said. It's not the same thing. He thought about this for a long time. Then he said, I would have made it about me. I know. You were right that I would have. I know that too. It wouldn't have been the right thing for me to do, he said. But I would have done it anyway, because I am very good at doing the thing that looks like solving a problem and is actually about control. She looked at him. Yes, she said. I'm working on it, he said. I know you are, she said. I've watched you work on it. For 4 years you've gotten better. Not good enough yet. No, she said. But better. He drove. The city began to announce itself in the gradual way of a city that is very large and cannot be contained. The density of the road signs, the increase of traffic, the first visible towers on the southern horizon. Your reading glasses, she said. Still there, the nightstand. Left side. She looked out at the approaching city. She set the blue notebook on the back seat. She folded her hands in her lap. When they came through the door of the house on Douglas Street, Aidan's father was in the kitchen. He had a key. He had apparently decided on this particular Thursday afternoon to use it and to leave a pot of his wife's soup on the stove because he had heard from the assistant, who was told only that Aidan was driving back from a trip, that Aidan would be home that evening, and because he was a father and that was what fathers did. He turned from the stove when they came in. He looked at Renata for a long moment. His face did a thing that his face very rarely did, which was to show exactly what was happening inside it. He opened his arms. She walked across the kitchen and let herself be held. Aidan stood in the doorway and looked at his wife in his father's arms and looked at the soup on the stove and looked at the reading glasses on the counter where she must have set them when she put her bag down, and he thought, there is going to be a great deal to do. There is the Law Society, and there is Douglas Stroud. and there is a property on the Lake Road in Belford that needs work, and there are 19 months of absence to account for to the people who deserve an accounting, and there are 19 months of his wife's life to learn at whatever pace she is able to teach them. And there is time. There is time for all of it now. They sold the Rosedale house 2 years later and split the year between the city and Belford in a way that had no fixed rule and suited them both. They bought the house on the Lake Road. Aidan spent one weekend of every month that winter learning from a contractor named Mr. Bassey how to level a floor that has not been level since the 80s. He was not good at it. He got better. Renata went back to the archives, not the university. She went to work at the Belford Public Library with Mr. Osei on the days she was in town, cataloguing a collection of local history documents that had been sitting in 3 cardboard boxes in the back room for as long as Mr. Osei had worked there, which was 31 years. The work was slow. She did not mind. Douglas Stroud was eventually found to be alive and conducting business in Lisbon, which the relevant authorities found interesting for a number of reasons. What happened to him after that was a matter for the authorities and for time, and not for Renata and Aidan, who had by then a house with a porch that faced a lake. In August, when the water was warm enough, she swam. He sat on the porch and watched her. The light in August in that part of Ontario comes in long and low off the water in the early evening, and it turns everything it touches: the dock, the birches at the edge of the yard, the surface of the lake, and the person swimming in it. A color that is very hard to name, somewhere between gold and the particular clean light of a place you have always meant to come back to. She swam to the middle of the lake and floated on her back for a while with her face to the sky. He watched her float. He thought, "I would have made it about me. I am glad I did not get the chance." She came back to shore. She climbed the dock. She sat beside him on the porch step, still wet, with her feet on the grass, and she leaned her shoulder into his, and the lake went on in front of them in the long August light, and she said nothing, and he said nothing, and they did not need to. If this story stayed with you, please leave a comment telling us the moment that landed hardest, and tap the like button, and subscribe to Platinum Files for a new story every week. Pull up a chair, pour yourself something warm. We will be right here.